All right, let's go ahead and get started. It's my pleasure to welcome Ranger Kate from the Hopewell Culture National Historical Park. And she's here today to talk to us about the archaeology and the anthropology of the park and the surrounding area. So welcome. I'm going to mute myself and disappear.
All right, well, welcome. I'm excited to be here with you all. I know that you folks that are in the club are coming to visit the park later this season. But as we go on throughout this program, so I am Ranger Kate or Kate, and you guys are welcome to use the chat box to ask any questions. I will also be asking you all questions. I am an educator here, so I tend to work on the method of asking questions to get you guys thinking about the area. We'll go over an overview of Hopewell Culture itself, also what the national park does to protect this culture and these resources here. I'll show you guys some cool things, and then I'll leave some time at the end for any questions. I can't promise that I'll be able to answer all those questions, but hopefully if I can't, I can direct you to our website or things that can better answer those questions. But to kind of get started, I am a ranger at Hopewell Culture National Historical Park, which is based in Chillicothe, Ohio. So we're about an hour south of Columbus, and we are a national park that protects a prehistoric American Indian culture, and we are a multi-site park. But to really think about the National Park Service, if you visit any 423 national park sites out there, you will see a ranger dressed like me at most of those visitor centers or walking around on the grounds. But to really understand what we're doing as an agency, I like to show our logo and kind of get thinking about what we protect as a national park. So here on our screen is a bigger image of the logo of the National Park Service, and it's got 5 elements to it that show what the National Park Service protects. Can you guys play I Spy with me today and spot any of those 5 items? We can put them in the chat box if it's easier for folks, but can you guys spot some of the things on there that you think the National Park Service protects? Anybody? Wildlife. Yes, we got a bison on there for sure. What else? Water. The bison gets thirsty on our logo for sure. The natural environment. So we got grass and trees, definitely. There's a habitat, cultural artifacts. There's one more item in the background. Anyone know what that is? We don't have them here in Ohio, but you head kind of east or west from us, you might hit them. Anybody? Mountains. So the 5 main things on our logo is the sequoia tree, which represents all the plants that we protect within a national park. That bison is that wildlife, and we protect wildlife as large as bison and grizzly bears to as small as bacteria. There is also water. So there's plenty of places within the National Park Service that we are protecting water systems, watersheds, seashores, lakes, riverways. Those are protected by the National Park Service. The mountain in the background represents all of your geological features and those scenic vistas that we protect as a national park. And someone said cultural artifacts. So the final item is the shape of our arrowhead. So that represents all cultural elements of the National Park Service and of the US's heritage that we protect. And specifically here at Hopewell Culture National Historical Park, we are protecting those cultural elements. So this prehistoric American Indian culture that we are protecting, they didn't leave anything written behind. So what we know about them is based off of archaeology. So this is an early photo of archaeology that was done here at one of our sites. So you can see these folks are out here, not in your super informative gear. They maybe have a shovel with them, some ladders. So archaeology, American archaeology really got its start here with Hopewell Culture. And we're able to see that in a lot of our archival photos. But archaeology wasn't exactly the cleanest science in the beginning. So it was something that was find the coolest things to show your buddies, to show your colleagues, to take home with you, versus today, it's find what these people were about. So when you think about archaeology, you're studying the history of people and their cultures, not exactly what the cool things were that they made. So archaeology started out a little sloppy, a little less scientific, but it's definitely grown in those last 100 or so years. But if you talk to some of the archaeologists here at Hopewell Culture, they might say that really we didn't start our archaeology early enough with this culture. So because they are an American Indian culture that's 2,000 years old, we've missed a lot of stuff, but we're able to continue to make our best guesses to understand better what this culture is doing. But when we think about it, we can't just look at the pretty things that they left behind. We have to think about them as people. So in our everyday life, we need things to survive. And the people of the Hopewell culture absolutely did that in the surrounding area. So this culture is known for their earthworks, for their big achievements, but they also were living everyday life out here. So where are some places that you all get things that you need every day? What are some areas that you might go to find what you need to survive every day? The grocery store, definitely. So sometimes your grocery store can be your one-stop shop. Well, for the people of the Hopewell culture, that's what the forest was. And so they were a hunting, gathering, and growing culture. And they lived in smaller groups outside of the earthworks that we as a national park are protecting. So in their habitation sites, they were hunting for different types of animals. So to give you a sort of guess of what they were hunting for, large ungulates like your elk and your deer and maybe wood bison, but they were also fishing in those river systems. Most Hopewell sites don't sit more than a mile from water. Water is a life source. It's something that you need every day. So not only were they able to get fish and freshwater mussels from that water, they also were able to get a supply of drinking water. Today, I might not drink the rivers that they would have drank from 2,000 years ago, but we as humans have altered quite a bit of landscapes. And in their woods, they also would have found rabbits and turkeys, but they weren't just hunting these animals for their meat. These were their toolboxes. So once they were able to get all the meat, they were able to also alter bones and furs into tools and things that they needed in every day to survive. But how did they hunt for these animals? Anyone have a guess on the tool they use? This is more of a trivia question, less of a inquiry question. Any guesses on what tool they might have used? How did they keep meat fresh? They probably would have smoked or cured it in ways. There were salt areas around here, so they could have cured meats, but they also could have smoked it to keep it longer, or only got what they needed to be able to feed their families. But what would they have used to hunt for these animals? A spear? Well, sometimes we need a tool to help us throw the spear a little better. So I'm going to show you guys and share a video of the tool that they used, but they used an atlatl.
To hunt.
And so
the atlatl. The atlatl was a very simple, basic tool, but it was very effective at ranges of up to about 60 feet. On one end, it would be held. On the opposite end, there was a point. The point would be inserted into a spear. A spear like this was typically between 5 to 6 feet long. On one end, there were feathers that would guide it through flight. On the opposite end, you could attach a spear point. The thrower would insert the atlatl into the spear and then put the spear and the atlatl into the throwing position. Now, the important thing to remember about throwing the atlatl is that the motion is very similar to that of throwing a baseball. Very simple, very effective.
So that atlatl tool with the physics behind it allowed for you to throw those spears or those darts much harder to be able to hunt for those animals. But thinking about what you need in your everyday life, the people of the Hopewell culture also needed that. So we've got water with the river systems. We've got food from hunting, but they didn't only hunt, they also gathered and grew their food. So some items that they gathered, I'm going to show you a little closer up and see if you can guess what some of those items are. So this is something that we don't see as often anymore in the area. Does anyone have any guesses what is inside this nice spiky ball that they would have gathered? A chestnut, absolutely. So we don't see American chestnuts much anymore, but we do see Asian chestnuts, but they would have gathered those. They were a good fatty oil that they could gather. Acorns could be something that is processed and turned into a meal, and also walnuts, specifically around here, black walnuts. Again, another healthy fatty nut. And like we said before, the freshwater mussels were something that were gathered in the river systems. So a pretty big item. Mussels would have been a big source of food for them as well. But these were just some of the plants that they gathered in their forested areas or in the rivers. But they also gathered some other items in the forest that I'll show you guys some pictures of and see if any of you guys have tried any of them before. So on here, not only did they gather berries and nuts, pawpaws were common around here. So if anyone here has ever eaten a pawpaw, they were here 2,000 years ago. And it's a tropical fruit that grows in the Midwest. Tastes a little bit like a banana mixed with a mango. So they were getting all these fruits and seeds from the forest during the seasons. So their meals were very seasonal based on what they could find. But not only were they gathering in certain seasons, because the pawpaws ripen in the spring or in the fall, and some of their berries would come in the summer, but they also were farming. So not only were they growing their own food and gathering it, the growing part was something that added to their ability to be able to stay fairly sedentary in their areas. So these were not a nomadic tribe. They might have moved to a little bit closer areas in certain seasons, but the farming and the gathering allowed for them to stay at least within that Scioto River Valley. So sunflowers, you get a nice seed from it. Squash, this was pre-corn, so there wasn't corn being grown yet. And tobacco was something that was grown in their farms because they were using it for ceremonial practices. So they were growing everything that they needed. They didn't have a Walmart or a grocery store to go to when they needed these items, but food was an important source of energy because to be able to complete these huge earthworks, you needed a lot of energy. So your food source was very important. So the people of the Hopewell culture had water, food. They built shelters in the forests. Their habitation sites tended to be much smaller outside of the earthworks. And they also had a lot of space to work with. So that Scioto River Valley was a large expanse of open fields, forested areas, river valleys that really aided in helping them to thrive as a culture and as a group of people. But I keep using the word culture, and I want to know what you guys think of when you hear the word culture. What is something that comes to mind that helps you define what a culture is? Artwork, definitely. So artwork is a big thing that defines culture. What else? Group of people with shared experience, music, languages, definitely. Geography, your location can definitely lead to what your culture is. Shared beliefs, spirituality, maybe rituals that you might do or customs that are part of your group, clothing and textiles. What might you all do as a big group? What might you do together? Maybe some big achievements. So I always like to compare a culture to maybe if anyone's a sports fan, so you're part of a culture with that. If you wear the logo of your favorite sports team, right there you have artwork. If you are part of, the NFL and you don't shave your beard during playoffs week, maybe that's a ritual or a custom. And you do it all together. You don't watch these things alone. You don't be a part of it by yourself. So you're social. And when your team finally makes it to that big culminating event, that's your big achievement. So ceremonies, big achievements, economy, all of those can lead to a culture, and the people of the Hopewell culture left behind a lot for us to study them as a unique culture. So thinking about them, when we talk about Native Americans today, we think about it more as a bloodline, that you're part of this portion or this section of a Native American tribe. But really what we're talking about is a way of life when it comes to Hopewell culture. We're looking at people that subscribed to this big overarching idea or this customs or these rituals, but they might have practiced slightly different somewhere at home, but then they all culminated here in Southern Ohio. So we actually have a lot of sites here in Southern Ohio. So all these stars on this map represent different areas where Hopewell sites have been discovered. And if we zoom in even more specifically on the county that I'm in, these are all sites that are related to Hopewell. And these folks that were part of this culture were those big achievements. And those big achievements were building earthworks. So this culture was extremely geometric. So what are some similarities you all see between these 5 sites right here? This one's an easy one. Lots of circles, definitely. There's squares. This one doesn't have any of the parallel lines on it, but they tend to keep with those geometric shapes, and a lot of them are similar in size. So if you look at some of the squares, they are almost the exact same size at sites that are miles apart. So without the modern communication methods that we use today, they were working together as a group to continue that method of keeping things precise and geometric. And these sites are extremely large. So if we're looking at some of the sites that we manage as a national park, this is Hopewell Mound Group, one of our larger sites. This one is almost 130 acres. So if you're thinking about size-wise, this is really big. Large open fields that they built these earthworks around. Mounds were put inside, ceremonial sites were within them. So they were working with a lot of space. And they also aligned a few of them. So with this site, the square aligns with a portion of the square aligns with summer solstice and also winter solstice. So we see different sunrises and moonsets that go with it. So they weren't spending all their time on their cell phones when they were part of this culture. They were spending time watching their night sky, observing things around them to make connections to their everyday life or to continue to practice within their cultures. Another site that has a bit of a square shape is the site that I'm at right now, which is Mound City. This site is only about 13 acres. So it's about 10 times smaller than our Hopewell Mound Group. So you can see that they were still working with big space, but they tended to switch it up. And Sipe Earthworks, this one right here has the squares and the circles, and they think that Sipe was possibly built in one season. So think if you all had to spend your entire summer building this site that's over 120 acres. It's a lot of manpower, a lot of food would need to be provided to be able to build this big achievement. But not only were these folks building these big achievements, within them, there were rituals and practices and customs that they stuck with, specifically when it came to building the mounds. So this is a really simple display of what one of the mounds might have looked like. And this is kind of cut like a layer cake. So they were layering them over the burials. So when we say that they had burials in the mounds, what we actually mean is underneath them. So there would have been cremation basins, burials, altars left behind of things, clayed over that bottom part. And then as a group, we would start gathering baskets of those materials to start the construction of the mound. But it wasn't just dump the soil wherever we wanted. It was keep it in that pattern to create drainage and to create a pattern that stuck with these earthworks so that way they lasted forever. Well, the Hopewell didn't know about the plow coming through. But these sites had sand and gravel and what we call Hopewell cement kind of clayed over the top to seal in these sites. So these mounds were meant to be a headstone. They were marking somebody of importance to leave that thing that somebody could continue to come back and remember. So you had those customs and rituals that continued. And someone said that artwork was an important part of a culture. And we were lucky enough that some of the items found here at our sites relate to materials from all over the country. And these materials have all been turned into artwork, or what we might define as artwork in our modern language. So one of my favorite items that we have is an obsidian spear point. So the obsidian has been tested and it shows that it comes from the same obsidian in Yellowstone. So we don't see a lot of trade going on between the people of the Hopewell culture, and obsidian is the best option or the best choice to share that knowledge, because if they traded to get obsidian here in Ohio, we would see pockets of it between Ohio and Yellowstone. We don't. So they were making these grand gesture pilgrimages to gather this material, bring it back, and leave it for somebody of importance. Another common item or common material that was found was copper. So over time, copper patinas and becomes this beautiful green color, but they were observing their natural world for their artwork. So here we have birds, and in the rectangular breastplate, there's a geometric element to it. It's a shape, and it continues to keep a pattern within it. A lot of times it could have been them possibly noting your cardinal directions. North, south, east, and west also keep us fairly geometric. So copper was a common material that was found in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Another item that is so fragile that I'm surprised that they worked with is mica. And so it comes in these large sort of mineable sheets, and it was carved into items like a hand or a talon to represent what they were observing again in their everyday life, because they didn't have the ability to take a picture of what they were seeing. So they were leaving it behind in these beautiful materials. And finally, we have pipes. So pipestone is a common material that can be found around here near the river systems. Pipestone or soapstone, it's fairly soft to where it can be carved. But here we have a raven and a frog in my examples, but we have tons of pipe examples of all different kinds of wildlife that was seen here in Southern Ohio. And then a common pottery item is our duck pot. Why do we call it a duck pot? Because it looks like there's a duck on there. And that's another thing too with archaeology, is that the archaeologists named these items as best of what they were observing it to be as. So we see a duck here on this pot, and their pottery changed based on the regions that they were in. So the duck pot tended to stay fairly consistent throughout Hopewell, but the decorations on it might have gotten a little more showy or a little less showy depending on areas they were in, but it was still an element of Hopewell. So that artwork is extremely important when it comes to a culture. So we have rituals, we have big achievements, we have artwork, and we have social institutions. So they were gathering in these large groups here in Southern Ohio and working hard to construct these big earthworks to leave behind. And the ones that we have saved through the national park or through Ohio History Connection are just a drop in the bucket of what would have been around here in Southern Ohio or in Ross County. And so as we think about who these people were of the Hopewell culture, what archaeology has done for us to better understand, we can continue to grow and learn. And that's how our national park works. We're able to partner with American Indian tribes to get a better understanding of what modern cultures are doing and what modern cultures might have drawn from these past cultures. So that's something that as a national park we'll continue to work on and grow from. But I hope that you all have gotten a little sense of what the Hopewell culture is, and I can open up the floor for any questions that you folks might have about what the people were doing, things that have been found, maybe what our archaeology is doing, or what the National Park Service is doing. And I don't know if you guys want to, you're welcome to type the questions into the chat box and I can keep that going. And if you need more resources, our website is a great option to go and check out more about inside the collections and what the parks are doing. Marine shell exchange. So for the most part, all of the shells that have been found are whelks. These are replicas, and they were lightning whelks. So lightning whelks are actually left-handed ones. So they open on the opposite side, and these tend to come from the Gulf of Mexico. What a lot of the ones that have been found, they've been carved out. So the ones in our collections are missing the whole inside, maybe suggesting use for drinking of beverages or leaving behind as altars. But they most likely also made pilgrimages to the coast to gather those materials. What evidence suggests that Sipe earthworks was built in a season? That is just what the archaeologists have kind of made an assumption on based on what was left behind and how things were kind of studied of it. It's the hearsay that I've heard around the park. But some of these earthworks, if you had enough people around, it's definitely something that could be built fairly quickly, as long as you were functioning in a good society. So the mounds that have alignments, we have a few options, or a few of our sites have these alignments. Hopeton, which is one of the ones across the river from us, and Hopewell Mound Group, their alignments are either with summer or winter solstice. And Newark Earthworks, which is Ohio History Connection, has an alignment with an 18-and-a-half-year moonrise. So it was somebody that was making these observations and keeping an eye on those locations. But I have experienced the winter solstice sunrise. It does cut right through a section of it, and most likely they weren't observing it from within the earthworks. So we have a lot of ridge lines around, so they were observing it from a distance. So they were setting up these places because they didn't have watches. So these solstice, these equinoxes were all a time stamp for them, that they might have all come together to watch this, to be a part of it, or just to mark time of when is a good time to share knowledge. I'm not exactly sure how many folks it would have entailed to build Sipe earthworks, being that it's over 120 acres. Best assumptions is that there were hundreds of people that would gather for these small, short time periods to construct earthworks. I don't know of any marine shell pendants associated with us. For the most part, what I've seen in our collections, and I'm not our collections manager or an archaeologist, but the ones that I've seen in our collections are all whelk shells that are missing the insides. Were the Hopewell Algonquin? The Hopewell were over 2,000 years ago, so the real question would be, were Algonquin Hopewell? And a lot of the Eastern American Indian tribes could probably at some point trace back lineage to being associated with the culture. But we have to remember again that this was a culture. So it'd be like, are you Christian or are you Christian? So it's a big overarching umbrella that would have held a bunch of folks that all sort of subscribed to it, less of a bloodline. Where are the Octagon earthworks located besides Newark? They are the Octagon is part of Newark. And then our High Bank site, which is not open to the public, that one also has an octagon associated. So there are other shapes besides squares and circles. So we do see that. I don't know much about the Hopewell Road. That is one of those sort of stories within archaeology and Hopewell stuff. There's been no proof of the Hopewell Road. Timeline with respect. So the people of the Hopewell culture were active here in this area from about 0 AD to about 450 AD. And after that, they didn't cease to exist. They just ceased to practice their culture, which we can all relate to cultural change because we're not doing the same things our grandparents did. And how many people are buried in each mound? It depends. Some mounds have only one burial, some have 2, 3, 4, 5. There was no direct pattern that we can associate with each mounds and burials. For the most part, our best assumptions is that it's people of importance. So for you and I, if we aren't royalty or people of importance, we probably would have had at-home cremations or burials. We wouldn't have been put into these complexes. We would have just been celebrated at home in a smaller setting. Yeah, they wouldn't been associated with family units. It was more your medicine man, your shamans, your people of importance that were being buried in them. We don't know how many folks would have gone on these pilgrimages to gather these materials. My guess is if you're traveling over 4,000 miles, it's going to be a small group. You're not going to take everybody. And thinking about individually, as the people of the Hopewell culture, they lived in family units of about 2 or 3 families. So it wasn't a lot of people outside in their small groups that were living together. They weren't these big clans. It was little groups of folks. I'm not sure about the Hopewell adding to Adena mounds. They did slightly overlap in timeline. Like any other culture of respect, my guess is they saw them, respected them, kept them in place, but weren't going to alter them. So because we do not dig up burials anymore, DNA research of remains is not our biggest study. And a lot of the ones, at least here at Mound City, were cremated. Other sites did not have full cremations, but also if you know anything about biology, after 2,000 years, things definitely decompose. Serpent Mound, we don't know anything about it. It's got carbon dates from all 3 time periods within the woodlands. It could be Adena, it could be Hopewell, it could be Fort Ancient. They are very unsure about it all. And I don't know much about angel mounds. I really only know about these mounds here in Southern Ohio. These have all been great questions. Do we have any other questions? If not, I think I can send you guys off. Mounds in Pike County.
Yes, there's some.
Yep, so even though I showed you just Ross County on the close-up map, Hopewell stretched across most of Southern Ohio. The mica hand is in the hands of Ohio History Connection. So our artifacts don't only lie with the National Park Service. Ohio History Connection has a collection. Harvard University has a collection. The British Museum has a collection. So we stretch far and wide. We only have so much here at our collection site. Our website, or if you download the National Park Service app, will at least direct you to our mound sites. If you go to Ohio History Connection's website, they can also direct you to different earthworks that they manage as well. So the National Park Service was initially established in 1923 here at Mound City. So we were set aside as a national monument to protect these mounds of importance and this culture of importance. And that was in 1923. But even before that, the mounds had been sort of in the idea of Ohio archaeology. But we have been a national park site since 1923, so 99 years this year. Still not long enough to protect them. How many rangers work at our site? It depends on which department you're talking about. So I work in interpretation and education, and there we have anywhere from 2 permanent rangers, and then in the summer we'll add seasonal staff that allows for us to have even more folks along with part-time rangers. But we also have archaeologists, and even on top of resource management, we also have natural resource management staff. We have maintenance to maintain all these sites so folks can keep visiting them. And of course, we have the behind the scenes admin group that like to keep us in check.
Well, thank you so much for being our host today.
Thanks for having me. It was exciting to have all you folks visit us, and hopefully you can get an opportunity to head to Southern Ohio and come and meet us in person.
We'll be there in end of April, the Anthropology Club. So I did want to mention for the people who are still here that next week's lecture is a bioanthropology lecture. Dr. Marjana Roxandic. I'm not probably saying that wrong. She's going to talk about a new species of human ancestor that they've discovered called Homo bodiensis. So you guys are welcome. It's going to be the same time. You can use the same link actually that you used to get here. We'll be posting it like we normally do. So if you don't, if you know, we'll post more information later. Well, thank you, Ranger Kate.
Thanks again.
You have a great day.
Yeah, you all too.
All right. Thanks, everyone.